Hi everyone, my name is James. Welcome to King's Fine Woodworking. Today I'm building a Birdseye Maple lap desk for my wife, and it has some layers of ebony and cocobolo in it, so I think it turned out to be a pretty nice project. But first, I have a couple of announcements I'd like to make. Tonight, November 24th, 2017, I'm going to have a live session at 7 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. And I'm going to talk about glue. It's basically everything you ever wanted to know about glue. All the different types of glue, what to use, when, why, what is stronger, and maybe even a little bit of the chemical reason behind why one might be better than the other. So hopefully you can tune in for that. That's tonight at 7 p.m., November 24th, 2017. And next is the big announcement. Basically today is Friday, November 24th, 2017. It is Black Friday. And I'm going to do something special for all of my fans and viewers who have been watching my channel and helping it grow from the very beginning. There has been a huge demand for our Thor's Hammer woodworking mallets. It is sort of our signature piece, and we have decided to sell 100 of these mallets at exactly half price. Depending on the species of wood, in most cases this is exactly what it costs us to buy the wood and put the time in to assemble them. So you're essentially getting it at cost, and we wanted to say thank you for everybody for helping our channel grow, and we thought this would be a nice way to do it. So that's the deal. It is on our website, and I will leave a link in the description, and there is a code, a checkout code. The checkout code is limited. And it's all one word, all caps, and I'll also put that in the description. But we can really only afford to do it for 100 mallets, so it is first come, first served, and they will be signed and numbered. It includes all the mallets that we sell. It's just basically the first 100 of them. And that's basically it for the announcements. If you've been thinking about getting one of our Thor's Hammer woodworking mallets, it might be your chance. Now let's get on to our build for the day. The first thing that I typically do is rough cut all the pieces to approximate length. Then I like to joint one edge, and after that I will take it over to the table saw to cut the other edge parallel to the first one that I just jointed. We lucked out in finding this piece of Birdseye Maple at our local hardwood dealer. It was really a highly figured piece. And I'll basically follow that procedure until I have all the pieces that I need that are cut to approximate size. And for me, rough cutting to size means I make them about 1 inch bigger than they need to be so that I can trim them down later in the project. And you can probably see that unsightly knot there. I am kind of strategically cutting around that to avoid that being in my final project. The birdseye figuring is actually a very interesting phenomenon. You can see the birdseye figure there going all the way through the end grain of that board from one side to the other. And nobody really knows what causes it. There has been research done by people trying to actually cultivate this variety of wood because it has a higher selling price, and no one's been able to reproduce it. What they have been able to do is discount the two most popular theories, that it is possibly caused by birds pecking or that it is caused by a fungus. Both of those have been proven false. It does occur in a few different species of wood, but it is most common in hard maple, and it is also most common in the Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada. So here's something really cool I wanted to add to this project for my wife. This is a piece of Macassar Ebony that I have been keeping for probably 26 or 27 years. And I've decided to add a band of ebony to the top of this desk. The ebony was actually a tiny bit short in getting all the way across the top. So I thought maybe what I'll do is I'll splice in a piece of my favorite wood, which is cocobolo or cocobolo. I think it depends on where you come from as to how you pronounce it. And so I've got a block of it here, and I'm going to cut this down, and I'm going to splice a piece of this in. This piece came from a turning blank that I bought at, I was either a Rockler store or possibly a Woodcraft store, and they sell quite a few turning blanks. The first thing I did was scrape off the excess wax, and then I went ahead and jointed it. Now I of course will cut it to the right size. To me, this wood has the most beautiful grain of any species. This is a Central American wood, and it is a member of the rosewood family. If you're going to be cutting small pieces like this right up next to your fence, a good thing to have is something like this gripper. It allows you to put good downward pressure and pressure against the fence as well, and push the piece all the way through, and it kind of holds both sides. So it's a nice safety push block to have. And now I've got my piece cut out. So what I'm doing now is I am aligning these two pieces, and I'm kind of drawing a diagonal line across the two in the way in which I want them to join. This kind of joint is called a scarf joint, and I think it's spelled S-C-A-R-P-H. It's a very common boat building joint where they will lap two pieces of wood together to get a much longer piece. Once I have this scarf joint drawn out, I'm going to set it up on my tapering jig, and that will allow me to cut it all the way through in one pass. If you're interested in building a tapering jig like the one I designed and built here, I do have a video you can watch on how to do it, and I even have plans for how to make it. And I'll put a link to those in the description. So the cool thing about lining it up like this is that it has cut them both, and it has cut them both at the identical angle. I don't really have any idea what angle it is, but it doesn't matter. I just wanted it to match my drawing, and the important thing is they're both exactly the same. And you can see how I'm going to splice them together into the tabletop portion of this lap desk. And here I've laid out all the pieces in the way they're going to go, just to see what it's going to look like when it's all made. And since I'm dealing with exotics, it is really important to use acetone, which is a really good solvent to pull all of the oils off of the surface before I glue it together. If I leave those oils there, my glue is not going to make a very strong bond. So we want to soak the surface with acetone and then wipe it off really well to get all the oils off. Here, there are a lot of ways that I could have maybe created a complex system in order to clamp this down, but the desktop really isn't going to be under any special load or anything like that. So I just put glue on both surfaces of this joint. I'm going to press it very firmly together. I'm checking the surfaces there to make sure they're mated exactly. I'm going to hold it for about 10 or 15 seconds until that glue tends to feel like it's tight and not moving much, and I'm just going to use tape as a clamp. Now I am actually gluing this up on the top of my cast iron table saw surface on purpose. This surface is perfectly flat, and that's really what I need for this joint. I'm not worried about the water or moisture in the glue attacking the cast iron, because in 2 or 3 minutes I'll be done and I will thoroughly clean the surface of the saw. And I just kept working around each of the 4 sides of this joint, and I have taped it securely, and now I'm going to set that aside and let that dry overnight. Now it's time to prepare the surface boards for joining. Before I can do that, you may have noticed a little bit of rocking when I was doing the cross-cutting, and that's because they all have a bit of a twist in them. That seems to happen to me whenever I buy some woods with a lot of figure in them, is they always come with twist. So the way to do that, to take out the twist, is the first thing you do is flatten one side on a jointer, and it may take a few passes. So I don't know if you noticed, the jointer caught on that edge when Sai was pushing this through, and that's because of the twist. So she backed up and then did it again. And another important thing to note is that she's kind of holding the piece from the outside edges in an effort to keep it flat. You should be able to hear that the jointer is only catching the outside edges, and it's because there's a bow in the board as well. So if you proceed like that, you'll eventually get that out. And once you do that, you can move it over to the planer. Here, you're going to put the flat side you've just created from the jointer down on the surface of the planer, and that will make the top side parallel to that. And onward to the glue up, which is of course our favorite part. Just before the glue up off camera, I cleaned both sides of this exotic wood part with acetone to get all the excess oils off. And since we tend to make sure there is a whole lot of glue in the joint in order to ensure there are no missing sections, before it has a chance to dry, we like to turn it up and kind of scrape the excess off and clean it off at this point. And so in response to some comments, and just to show all of you that I do own and love to use hand tools, I am using my low angle jack plane to plane down the surface of the exotic. You see all those beautiful ebony shavings? Haha, who am I kidding? I'm a power tool user. Twice the fun and half the time. You can't argue with that. Okay, maybe you can, but this is the way I like to do it. Once that's done, I like to use my crosscut sled to get it down to size. And the nice thing about the crosscut sled is I get perfect 90-degree angles. I have decided to put a chamfer on the bottom of the desktop portion of this lap desk, and I think that's going to make it look a little bit thinner and perhaps a little more elegant. And I do think that has a pretty good look to it there. I think I'm going to make the legs really simple, just a couple of boards that I'm going to dado in, and so I've got to cut those dados. So I've got my dado stack blade, I've built it up to the right thickness, and I'll just cut one dado on each side of the board. You will probably want to do a test cut first on a scrap piece to make sure that you have your dado width correct and that it fits the legs that you're going to put in that slot. So what I'm preparing for here is I'm going to cut a groove in the tabletop portion. My wife wanted something that would hold some pencils without them rolling away. So I'm taking some MDF, cut it straight, I'm using some double-sided tape, and I am putting this in a location around an opening. I'm creating a hole for me to drop in a dish cutting bit and to carve out a groove in the top. And this structure sort of needs to be complete all the way around so that the bearing, which goes on the dish cutting bit, which fits in my router, will perfectly ride against this, and we'll have the little nice dish-shaped cutout underneath it. And you'll see how that works here in just a second. I will have a link to all of the tools and supplies and everything that I've used in this video in the description in case you're interested in getting any of it. So here's my plunge router, and you can see the bearing on the bit, and I'm basically plunging it down just a tiny bit. I've created this opening to be just exactly the size of the bearing, and I think I'm taking about a 1/8 of an inch deep cut, and my daughter's running the vacuum there to kind of pick up some extra dust. So overall, I probably went about 3/16 of an inch deep, which I did in about 3 or 4 passes. So that way I could avoid, any burning or tear out, and I had a nice easy cut. I thought it might be nice to have part of this groove in the ebony and part of the groove in the maple. And it takes a few minutes to pull off the template pieces and get the tape off of there. And any tape residue you don't get will sand off pretty easily. And that's kind of the look we were going for. I think it came out all right. Oh, there's the photo bomber. We knew she was going to do that sooner or later. So as you can see, the ends will almost always burn because when you get to the end, the bit continues to turn even though the cut is done. So I'm going to use this sandpaper. This is a 3M flexible sandpaper, which is amazing stuff. I'll put a link to this in the description. I built a set of raised panel cabinet doors, and one sheet of this stuff got me through the whole build. And you can see this stuff works wonders. I sped it up a little bit. There was really probably 2 or 3 minutes of sanding. And I also like to take this paper and wrap it around these foam blocks. It's maybe $5-6 for a set of foam blocks. You find one that fits the contour that you're looking for, and then you can wrap this flexible paper around it, and you can sand virtually any contour. So this is pretty nice, and I'll put links to these in the description if it's something you think you might want. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and get close to final sand on all of my surfaces. And I use a tack cloth to take the extra sawdust out of all the surfaces before I switch grits and go to a finer paper. That way the rougher or bigger particles of sawdust aren't going to continue tearing up the surface. And here I'm going to go ahead and cut the legs for this tabletop. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. Your support really helps us keep producing content, and we're very, very thankful for everything that you do for us. And I'd also like to thank all of my viewers, and especially my viewers who do their purchases through the links in the description on Amazon. Amazon gives us a small percentage of the sale, and all of those things go to help support our channel. So from all of us to everyone out there helping us do this, thank you very much. After cutting both legs to size, I'm going to go ahead and tape them together. I don't think I want the legs just to be square. I think that would look a little clunky. So I'm going to draw some sort of a shape into them, and I think I'm going to cut them both out at the same time on the bandsaw. So a nice way to make sure that they're identical is to tape them together with some double-sided tape and get all your marks drawn the way you want it, and then cut them together and sand them together as if they're one piece. And I just drew and redrew a couple of times and until I came up with a look that I liked. And I also have plans for this project in the event that anybody is interested. And in the plans, we have actually taken the identical drawings for the piece that we have here and recreated it. So you could actually print that and use that as a template. If you decide you wanted to build a lap desk like this, all of that work is already done for you. And there's a link to those in the description. So now I have taken it over to my bandsaw so I can cut them both out as one piece, and I'm cutting just outside of the line. I'm going to use my oscillating spindle sander and my hand sander to sand it down to the line to be exact. So with the bandsaw we want to cut it just outside of the line. And if you don't have a bandsaw, it's really not a problem. This can be cut very easily with a handheld coping saw, which is what I did for many years before we got a bandsaw. And next we'll move over to the oscillating spindle sander. This is a tool that just sort of speeds up what you do. It doesn't work any better necessarily than doing this by hand or doing it with a belt sander or even doing it with a random orbit sander. It just makes it a little bit faster. And of course I will go back to the random orbit sander to clean up the corners and clean up the sides. And so that let us get this down to where both pieces are identical, and at this point we can split them apart and start working on assembly. I've decided I want to router the edge of the legs just a little bit, so I'm kind of marking the point where the legs go into the top. I'm just going to use a 1/8 inch radius roundover, but I don't really want the roundover to go all the way up to the top. I want it to stop just before the leg goes into the top, so that's why I have marked that. And we'll need to sand that up just a little bit. It's hard with maple, even with fresh, sharp new cutters, to totally prevent burns, so you got to have your sander ready. And so now it's time to glue. Once again, I like to apply glue to both sides of every surface before I stick them together. And I'm going to use a small square to sort of make sure that the legs stay square to the tabletop. I realize, of course, this is not what these squares are for, but for me, it's pretty darn convenient, and they're actually made of 1/4 inch thick aluminum. They're very strong, and I'm also not clamping them down very hard. I'm really just clamping them lightly and keeping them there more as a reference to see what's happening. Once everything is in place and clamped down, it's a good time to clean off the excess glue. And then, of course, we'll proceed over and do the same thing on the other side. After this, I was just a little concerned that possibly having that shallow dado and the legs sticking out about 8 inches might not be super strong. It turns out that it was, but I wasn't sure, and so I went ahead and I wanted to make some little triangular gusset pieces. And so I set my saw to 45 degrees and I cut these guys out, and I'll show you how these go here in just a second. Here again, this could be a scary cut depending on how you do it. So you want to make sure you have a quality push block. Something like this gripper works great. You could probably make something that works good. If it's got good friction on the surface, it'll hold the pieces down safely for you. So we couldn't really avoid burns on those cuts, and so the first thing I want to do is to sand off the burns before I cut them to fit. Then by hand, I'm going to just take off the corners so that when we're handling it, it's not sharp. And this is how I am going to attach it in here. I think I'll chamfer or bevel the two ends back to look nice, but this is going to give a whole lot of strength to the piece. Once again, you can see the board's flopping a little bit, and so that's allowing it to burn a whole lot. What I did after that is I just went over it lightly with a real shallow pass and took the burn off. You can do that if you don't need an exact length. If you do need an exact length, you're going to have to sand. And by gluing these things in, I'm going to tremendously increase the total glue surface area, which is going to add a whole lot of strength to the piece. Fortunately, I have those vertical clamps already in place, and that makes for a perfect surface for me to use these two small clamps against those as leverage to clamp that gusset piece in place. Once again, time to clean off all of the excess glue, and I didn't have quite as many squeeze clamps as I needed, so I had to use some C-clamps on the other side, but there it is, all glued up. So I let that dry overnight, and I proceeded to do my final sanding. I sure do like the look of that bird's eye. I started sanding with 150, I moved to 220, and then finally I moved to 320. So for Birdseye, I like to use acetone to clean the surface finally after all of the sanding. I think this takes all of the dust out of all of the little Birdseye pecks that are there, and that allows for a little bit more depth. So when I finish it with lacquer, visually it seems to give the piece a little bit more depth and has a little bit more of a 3D look to it. So when you move it around, it has kind of an elegant look in the light. That look where it has a 3D effect is actually called chatoyance. You can almost see just a little bit of it here, and there isn't even a lacquer finish on it. With the build complete, it is time to finish it. My finish of choice is lacquer, of course. I like Deft, D-E-F-T brand lacquer. What I like about lacquer is it's a very hard and durable finish, and it dries very fast, so I can put multiple coats on in one day. You can get it in gallon size or in small cans like this, which is convenient for small projects. So my daughter Sai is going to demonstrate the best way to spray any finish on, and that is that you start the spray off to the left or right before the piece, you proceed all the way through the piece, keep spraying past it, and move in a method like that, consistently and slowly, about 6 to 8 inches away from the surface. You get a very nice thin film, and multiple coats of that leads to a perfect finish. Now, all lacquer finishes are really quite toxic, so you cannot spray lacquer without wearing a respirator. So that's something that you should keep in mind. And by toxic, I mean the solvents that carry the lacquer out of the can and onto your project. Once your project has dried, there's our photo bummer. Once your project has dried, all of the solvents have evaporated, and you are essentially left with an inert plastic that won't react with anything. And that is completely safe. It's food safe. If you were to even chew on it, eat it, wouldn't make any difference. It's a very safe finish. But in its vapor form or liquid form coming out with the solvent, you definitely don't want to breathe that. And so there we have it. That wraps up our build. And I want to thank you very much for watching.